It had been a long winter for Emma Clark. She was a single mom working 2 jobs and trying to raise her 10-year-old son, Jack, in a small town in Virginia. Every day felt like a fight to stay afloat. Their rent kept going up, and her paycheck barely covered food and bills. One morning, she sat at her small kitchen table with a cup of cheap coffee and stared at her phone. A new real estate listing caught her eye. Old farmhouse for sale. Needs repairs. Very low price. It was only $20,000. A price so low she thought it had to be a mistake. Curious, she clicked the pictures. The house looked worn out, peeling paint, cracked windows, and a sagging porch, but something about it spoke to her. It stood on 5 acres of land, surrounded by rolling hills and oak trees. It wasn't much, but it looked peaceful. Jack came over and peered at the screen. "Mom, is that our new home?" he asked with hope in his eyes. Emma smiled faintly. "I wish," she said softly, but the thought stayed in her mind all day. That night, she couldn't sleep. Something about that house felt right, even if it was falling apart. By morning, she made up her mind. She called the number on the ad and spoke with an old real estate agent named Mr. Parker. His voice was slow and friendly. "It's been empty for years," he said. "Used to belong to a Civil War family. Folks around here say the property's got history, maybe too much of it." Emma wasn't the kind of woman who believed in ghost stories. History or not, she saw a chance to build a future. She withdrew every dollar she had saved and applied for a small home loan. Within 2 weeks, the house was hers. When she drove up the gravel road with Jack in the passenger seat, her heart raced with nervous excitement. The farmhouse looked even older in person. The paint had faded to gray, and the porch steps creaked under her boots. Still, it had charm. The wind carried the smell of pine trees, and the land stretched wide and open. "Mom," Jack whispered, "it's kinda spooky." She smiled and ruffled his hair. "It's just old, sweetheart. Old things can be beautiful, too." They spent the first few days cleaning. Dust coated everything, and spiders had built tiny kingdoms in the corners. Emma opened all the windows to let in sunlight and fresh air. Jack helped sweep the floors while she scrubbed the walls and fixed what she could. In the evenings, they sat by a small electric heater, eating canned soup and laughing about how they'd turned this old place into a real home. One night, while unpacking boxes in the basement, Emma noticed something odd. The basement walls seemed uneven, like part of it had been built over. She tapped it with a hammer. The sound was hollow. Curious, she pulled away some loose bricks. Behind them was darkness, a narrow space big enough for a person to crawl through. She froze for a moment. "Jack," she called, her voice trembling slightly. "Stay upstairs for a bit, okay?" Her flashlight beam cut through the dust as she leaned closer. It wasn't just a hole, it was a tunnel. Old wooden beams lined the sides, and she could see the faint curve of a passage stretching forward. The air smelled of earth and time. She felt a chill run down her back. Someone had built this long before she was born. The next day, she called Mr. Parker. "Did you know about a tunnel under this place?" she asked. He sounded surprised. "A tunnel?" "No, ma'am. But the house dates back to the 1860s. Maybe something from the Civil War. Folks used to hide valuables or even people during hard times." Emma spent all day thinking about it. That night, after Jack went to sleep, she couldn't resist the urge to explore. She took a flashlight, a small camera, and crawled into the tunnel. It was narrow at first, then widened into a stone-lined corridor. She could see markings on the wall, scratches, initials, and numbers carved by hand. Her light flickered over an old wooden crate half buried in dirt. She brushed it off carefully and tried to open it. The hinges were rusted, but with some effort, it cracked open. Inside were a few metal coins, a rusted pistol, and a bundle wrapped in cloth. Her heart pounded as she unwrapped it. Inside was a stack of yellowed letters tied with a ribbon. She took them upstairs and spread them out on the table. Each one was dated around 1863. The letters were written by a soldier named Thomas Holly to his wife, Margaret. The handwriting was elegant, but faded. In one letter, Thomas wrote, "If this war keeps me from returning, let these words remind you of my love. Our home will always hold my heart, buried where no man can take it." Emma felt a lump in her throat. She realized she was sitting in the very same farmhouse where those letters had been written over a century ago. The soldier's wife must have lived here, waiting for news that never came. Over the next few days, she continued exploring the tunnel during daylight. It led further than she expected, curving beneath the orchard behind the house. At the end of it, she found a small chamber with a wooden chest. This one was larger and sealed with an old lock. She didn't try to open it right away. Instead, she took a photo and brought it to the local historical society. The curator, an elderly woman named Mrs. Dalton, was amazed. "If this is real," she said, "you might have found one of the lost Union hideouts." Soldiers sometimes built secret tunnels to store supplies or to hide from raiding parties. Emma couldn't believe it. What started as a desperate move to find a home had turned into something historic. But she didn't tell many people. She was afraid the government or collectors might try to take the property away. That night, she told Jack everything. His eyes went wide. "Mom, does that mean we live in a secret fort?" he said excitedly. She laughed. "Maybe something like that. But let's keep it our secret for now." Days turned into weeks, and the farmhouse slowly came alive again. Emma painted the walls, fixed the porch, and planted a small garden. The tunnel remained their secret adventure, a story they shared quietly at night. Every now and then, she'd find another old coin or piece of metal hidden in the dirt. But what meant most to her were the letters, the words of a man who loved his family and wanted them safe. Even during war, one evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Emma stood on the porch watching Jack play with their dog. The air was golden, and for the first time in years, she felt at peace. The house that once looked broken now felt full of life. She thought of Thomas and Margaret Holly, whose love had survived through time and stone. She smiled softly and whispered, "Thank you for keeping this place safe for us." But she didn't know that one last secret still waited inside that sealed chest. A secret that would soon change everything, not just for her, but for the entire town. For days, Emma couldn't stop thinking about the sealed chest she found deep inside the tunnel. She had told no one except her son, Jack, and Mrs. Dalton from the Historical Society. Every night, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the photo of that dusty old chest on her phone. Something inside her wanted to know what secrets it held. But another part of her was scared. What if opening it brought problems she couldn't handle? Finally, one Saturday morning, she made up her mind. She packed a flashlight, a crowbar, and a small hammer, then took Jack with her down into the tunnel. The air was cool and still, filled with the smell of earth and old wood. Jack held the flashlight while she cleared away the last bits of dirt around the chest. The lock was rusted, and she could tell it hadn't been touched for over a century. "Are you sure about this, Mom?" Jack asked quietly. She smiled at him. "Sometimes we have to be brave to find the truth." With one strong push of the crowbar, the old lock cracked open. The lid creaked as she lifted it. Inside, wrapped in a heavy cloth, were more letters. Several faded books, a metal box, and a small leather pouch. Emma carefully opened the pouch first. Inside were gold coins, old and shining even under the dim light. Jack gasped. "Mom, are these real?" She nodded, her hands trembling. The coins were from the 1860s, marked with the faces of presidents long gone. Beneath them was the metal box. She opened it gently and found a folded piece of paper. It was a map hand-drawn, with detailed markings of the surrounding land. At the top it said, "For Margaret, when the time is right." Emma's heart raced. The map seemed to point toward a hill behind the orchard. There was an X marked near an old tree stump. "Do you think there's more, Mom?" Jack asked, eyes wide. "Maybe," she said softly. "But let's take these to Mrs. Dalton before we dig anything." That afternoon, they drove into town and showed everything to Mrs. Dalton. The old woman's eyes filled with wonder as she handled the letters and map. "This is incredible," she whispered. "Thomas Holly must have hidden this to protect his family's fortune." During the war, many soldiers buried their savings to keep them safe from raiders. Most were never found. Emma felt torn. On one hand, she was a single mother struggling to pay bills. On the other, she didn't want to break any laws or lose the house. Mrs. Dalton smiled kindly at her. "The land and everything on it are legally yours now. You're not stealing from anyone. If you find something, it belongs to you, but you might also uncover part of history." That night, Emma couldn't sleep. She walked out to the back porch and looked at the orchard under the moonlight. The map's markings replayed in her mind. The next morning, she grabbed a shovel, and Jack followed her eagerly. They walked to the hill, found the old tree stump, and began to dig. The soil was soft after the recent rain. After a few minutes, her shovel hit something hard. She knelt down and brushed away the dirt. It was another wooden box, smaller but stronger than the first. Jack helped her lift it out. The hinges were weak, but when she opened it, her breath caught. Inside were more gold coins, a few silver bars, and a small framed photograph of a young couple, Thomas and Margaret Holly. They looked happy, standing in front of the same farmhouse that Emma had bought. Beneath the photograph was a short note. "For the one who finds this home again, let kindness be your treasure." Tears filled her eyes. She looked at her son, who was smiling from ear to ear. "Mom, we're rich," he shouted, jumping up and down. But Emma shook her head gently. "Maybe, but this isn't just money, Jack. It's a story that waited 100 years for someone to find it." They brought everything back to the house and locked it in a safe place. Emma didn't want the world to know yet, but word travels fast in small towns. Within a few days, people started whispering about the discovery. A local newspaper reporter showed up at her door, asking for an interview. Emma hesitated but finally agreed. She told the story truthfully, how she had bought the farmhouse, found the tunnel, and discovered the letters and coins. She didn't mention the second box or its contents. The story went viral. News channels called it the Miracle Farmhouse Discovery. Reporters came from nearby cities to film the site. Historians visited to study the tunnel and letters. But through it all, Emma stayed humble. She let the Historical Society display copies of the letters and maps, while keeping the original treasures safe. Soon after, the mayor invited her to a town meeting. He thanked her for preserving local history and helping put their small town on the map. "People will come here to see this place," he said. "You've turned an old, forgotten farmhouse into something special." A few weeks later, a group of historians confirmed that the coins and artifacts were authentic. They valued the collection at nearly $2 million. Emma almost fainted when she heard the number. She couldn't believe that the house she bought for $20,000 had changed her life forever. But instead of selling everything, she made a different choice. She sold a few of the coins, just enough to pay off her debts, fix the house completely, and set up a college fund for Jack. The rest she donated to build a local museum dedicated to Civil War families and their hidden stories. "Thomas and Margaret's love shouldn't be forgotten," she said. "Their story deserves to live on." As the months passed, the farmhouse became famous. Tourists came from all over to visit the museum and see the tunnel. Emma guided visitors herself sometimes. telling them how a struggling mom found hope under her own home. Reporters often asked her what she felt when she first opened that tunnel. She always smiled and said, "I thought I was just fixing an old house. I never knew I was fixing a piece of history and a part of myself." Jack grew proud of his mother. At school, his friends called him the Tunnel Kid. He told them stories about the brave soldier who loved his family so much he hid treasure to protect them. Every night before bed, he'd ask his mom to read one of Thomas's letters again. The words always filled the room with quiet warmth. Years later, the farmhouse stood strong and bright, with new paint and a welcoming porch. A small plaque near the gate read, "The Hale Clark Home, where love survived time." Emma often sat there in the evenings, watching the sunset over the hills. Sometimes she thought about how life had changed, the struggles, the nights she cried alone, the fear of losing everything. And then she remembered how hope had been buried under her feet all along, waiting for her to uncover it. One summer afternoon, a letter arrived from a university history department. They wanted to name a research program after her, the Emma Clark Preservation Fund, to honor her efforts in protecting historical heritage. She read the letter with tears of gratitude. She had gone from struggling to survive to inspiring others to remember the past. That evening, she and Jack walked down the tunnel one last time before sealing it for public safety. The air still smelled the same earthy and quiet. Jack shone his flashlight on the wall where Thomas's initials were carved. Emma placed her hand gently over them and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. You helped us find our way." When they came back up, the setting sun painted the farmhouse golden. Jack looked up at her and said, "Mom, do you think he knows we found it?" She smiled, her eyes soft with emotion. "I think he does, sweetheart. And I think he's happy we took care of what he left behind." The farmhouse door closed gently behind them. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying whispers of stories long past but not forgotten. And for the first time in her life, Emma didn't feel like a struggling single mom anymore. She felt like the keeper of something precious, proof that hope can be buried deep, but it always finds a way to rise again.